So first I want to talk about, we've just come out of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and we've talked a lot about repentance and atonement. And I kind of wanted to look at it on the other side and like, what does it look like for us to forgive people? And, looking through some things and came across this point, like, forgiveness, is, and they give an example of, right, like you tell a kid you have to eat your broccoli and the kid's like, I'm not going to, and you won't make me enjoy it. And we can force our kids to eat vegetables, can't force them to enjoy the vegetables. The idea that that's sort of like forgiveness. We can hold our tongue, we can tell them not to think about, we can not think about whatever the offense was, we can, not do anything to retaliate or get even. We can even be nice to this person and but we can't necessarily feel good about the person we're supposed to forgive, and that's okay. An idea that forgiveness is not doing anything because of our grudge or our feelings. That forgiveness is not saying anything to express our anger or hurt, and that we try to put it out of our minds to a degree. And just, right, so that the idea that forgiveness is a sort of feelings are like plants. If we try to neglect the anger or hurt and not feed it, then it will go away. If we try to feed the forgiveness just by trying not to think about it, trying to think positive things and do positive things, that's going to be what we end up generating. So that's the nutshell of what I want to talk about. So starting off, so what do some of you think forgiveness is, and how do you express forgiveness?
I think of the word justified, and justification in the sense that, if we're able to achieve that, that sense that we treat them as if they've never done what they did, that would cause us to need to forgive them. But I also layer over that my strong belief that we have to remember or not put ourselves in a position where we are risking harm to ourselves or others as well.
I don't know. I guess I take almost a cynical position that forgiveness is often just performative. It's like a social thing that, like if someone apologizes, we're expected to forgive, and so I think both the apology and the forgiveness can be very performative, and just kind of, this is the social glue or the social contract that allows us to acknowledge hurt and then move on. And I think the phrase like forgive and forget, it's so common because I think that's what we try to make it do, is to make it as if we can just forget it and now we can move on to the next thing. So I guess I'm not talking about quote unquote true forgiveness, but just kind of socially what forgiveness is in our culture. And so I see a lot of things where people are called to task for not forgiving because they've broken that contract. Well, he apologized. Why haven't you forgiven him? Or, kind of let bygones be bygones kind of thing. And I think there's a very strong element in our culture that that wants to kind of plaster over things, and forgiveness is performative forgiveness is a way to do that.
I think that's a really interesting point you make, Wade. Like, and to me, it seems like forgiveness as a social function is twofold. You have to, one, say you forgive them, and then two, act like you forgive them. Even though it seems that apologizing is only one fold. You just say that you apologize. You don't have to do anything to apologize. You don't have to make amends or make reparations or do something to demonstrate your apology, while you do have to demonstrate something for your forgiveness. Like, can you forget, like, it's raises the question to me, like, can you forgive someone but then still not treat them the way you used to, which I think is very valid. And I mean, I think David had a point as well, like, we can forgive someone and not act on that, in retaliation, not act negatively towards them, but that doesn't mean we're going to have the same relationship, and doesn't mean we're going to put ourselves in the same position as we did before.
I don't know if you can easily see the chat, Lee, but Tom Maha shared, I think whenever I forgive someone, I'm always careful to word it in a way to communicate that what they did was still wrong and hurt me or someone else. I don't want them to think that because I forgive them, it gives them a pass on their wrongdoing in the first place.
I think that's great. Let me open up my chat. Yeah, I think that's a great point, and like something I feel like we've seen in the past few years is an emphasis on what makes an apology and what's a good apology, and like, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. It's like, well, you didn't, that's not, like, that's a very half-hearted apology. You aren't, that apology isn't mentioning what was done wrong, isn't saying what you did, like, isn't acknowledging whatever action it was, isn't acknowledging that action is wrong. And then, yeah, I think that's a really good point, Tom. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, if the apology starts with, I'm sorry that you, that's not a good sentence stem. It really should be, I'm sorry, and then you have to finish it.
Yeah.
And I think part of a good apology is like not an expectation of forgiveness. Like if you go in it saying like, I'm doing this so that you'll forgive me and we get back to normal, I think that's like a bad start. I think that it should be like, this is how I feel, this is what I'm apologizing for, and then now the ball's in court. I feel like otherwise the forgiveness is kind of coarse, like Wade was talking about.
So I guess when the shoe's on the other foot, when we are seeking forgiveness, what sort of forgiveness do we want? And are we willing to, do we want unconditional forgiveness? Do we accept that we need to change? Like, does the change on our part need to happen before we can expect forgiveness? And I guess I'm thinking of both forgiveness in the sense of forgiveness from others, but also, I think a big part of like Christian theology is, forgiveness from God, or if we talk about sin, I think a couple weeks ago we talked about, two types of sin against others and sin against God. So if we sin against others, what kind of forgiveness, like what are our rules around wanting forgiveness, and especially with God, like what are our rules? Should God just be the better person and forgive us unconditionally?
I'm just thinking, like, if somebody's hurt us, like, do we have the right to like say that their apology was not enough, you know, like if somebody hurt you and then like in the midst of an email just said, I'm sorry for what happened, and then never elaborated it or anything, like, is it okay to still like to not feel forgiveness yet? Like I have a situation and I think about it and like it causes me a lot of bitterness, and like I'm like, what do I need to like get over this? Because like whenever anything comes in the situation, I'm just like, I can't deal with it. And I'm sure that in somewhere in the course of like the situation playing out that these people like said, I'm sorry in an email. So like the perfectionist or like legalistic mind is like, okay, well, they said they're sorry. Like, I want to be able to say like, well, you didn't even say you're sorry, but they did say they're sorry. But like, it's just not enough. And like, yeah, and I'm just kind of stuck there. And
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's, you know, and that can be true even if it's not a case of, like we were saying before, where you don't accept their apology because it's not a real apology. Like it could be a sincere, they might be sincerely sorry on their end, but I see what you're saying, Sarah, that it's like, well, that doesn't mean um, like necessarily that I'm over it and willing to forgive. Like I can accept that someone is sorry for what they did, and as Tom said, but still know what they did and the consequences. So I definitely kind of feel where you're coming from, even if it's not in dialogue with them, even if it's just in dialogue with yourself and saying, what do I need to be able to forgive them? Like what needs to happen? And sometimes there's situations where I say, I don't know, you know, I don't know if I will ever be able to, no matter how many times they sincerely apologize, you know, or they apologize to the best of their sincerity.
yeah. Yeah, and I've been trying to do like some self-reflection around it and figure out like, and I think it's like a mass of things, of issues about why this particular situation upsets me so much. But yeah, I feel like, I mean, this whole situation has to do with when Glenn and I were getting certified to be foster parents. And like our case manager fell off the face of the earth and didn't reply to emails, and we didn't pursue. We were just like patient and trying to give the benefit of the doubt, but we were trying to get it wrapped up before Meadow was born. And we would say that. And every time the ball was in our court for the process, we would do what we needed to do and then put the ball back in their court. And they had a lot of turnover and all this stuff happened and people were not replying to us. And then that person left the organization completely and nobody told us. And then the person above them, the only other person we knew in the organization, left and nobody told us. And then our certification, or some of the work we'd done toward our certification, expired, and we had no idea it was even going to expire. So it was like a money suck and a time suck to get it all done. And I think like it's just irritate. All that was just like irritating. And then there's like this guilt because like this is like, these are social workers, and social workers historically are overworked, and like I should be having compassion because this is like a fostering situation. I'm sure that everybody's just overworked, and it was just like we were overlooked. And I did have a lot of compassion throughout the process, but it was kind of like compassion, waiting, patience, and then it just got to the point where it's like,
Right.
I'm done. We've really gotten screwed over in this. And now like every time like it seems like they've like had turnover and people, and we're still like somewhat on the radar, and occasionally we get an email or a phone call, and like I don't even want to return the email or the phone call. I just like shut down because I feel like I don't even know who our case manager is. I feel like there's like certain things that should have happened. Like, I'm sorry this happened to you. Like, and I'm sorry, like I wish we could pay you back the money that it cost, but we can't. Just acknowledging that, even if they can't. Or I'm sorry for the time, and like, here's your new case manager, and maybe a case manager would want to even like see us face to face. Like I could like walk in the street and like our case manager pass her in the street or him and don't even know. I think it's a her because I know her name, but like wouldn't even recognize her.
Right.
I don't want to go on a big tangent. I'm sorry, but I'm just saying like I feel like it's the mixture of emotions because this is also like supposed to be like there's also the like, well, should I just get over this so that like we could be helping kids, and we purposely are not, because Meadows is smaller, but like the fact that it is like wrapped up in like a somewhat charitable kind thing
Right.
makes it more complicated to me. Like I feel like I'm supposed to just like let it go and I think part of it is the sadness knowing that there's kids who need help that gets mixed up in all these feelings. So
Right.
it's just really complicated. But my reaction surprises me, which is why I throw it out as an example, because like for me to like get an email and just like want to like ignore it and shut down, I could tell that that's not normally like how I would respond. So there's definitely crap going on inside.
Sarah, I think you bring up a lot of great points, and something I was thinking about along this lines is that, well, okay, so who's heard of that Gary Chapman, the love languages guy?
Yeah, he wrote Apology one too.
Five love languages. He has another book about the languages of apology, and that we receive, like, just like we receive love differently, we receive apologies differently, and that for some of us, like saying I'm sorry is enough, and some of us need like a confession, like I was wrong to, or we need like, and in my opinion, it's a little more wishy-washy than with love. Like I think depending on what the offense was, we need different forms of apology or a different combination of apologies. Like, I am sorry I did this, I was wrong to do that, and here's how we're gonna make it right. And like, so I think that's part of, like, Sarah, I kind of said in your situation, like, yeah, maybe they said it in an email that they're sorry, but it's like, that's a very casual way to kind of approach it, especially in a professional setting. Like, and yeah, and I think I think what you're describing is very difficult, and you're doing really well. Oh gosh. Hello?
We can hear you.
We can still hear
Good.
you.
Okay. Sorry, thought I was like disappeared. Yeah, and I don't think you're wrong for wanting an apology, and I think on our end for giving apologies is that I think giving apologies can be really humbling, and we don't often like that. Like, I think we're in a society where we want to be perfect and strong, and showing weakness or something is very difficult for us. And I think, like, talking about what Tom went back to, I think that was really good. Like, I accept your apology, but like what you did was still wrong. And going back and being like, I think sometimes forgiveness is a negotiation. Like I'm struggling with your apology. It would be easier for me to forgive if X, Y, and Z, like, if they, like, I'm sure they could have made an exception and extended your credentials or whatnot, so you didn't have to go through that whole process, especially since it was an error on their end.
Right.
Or like, is there some way they can make it up to you? Can they like give you a voucher to go through some program that you need to do? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like, or like, here's what we're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen to anybody else again, or like, or we're really sorry, this was just an extreme fluke, like whatever, but this was like our experience going through this.
Yeah. And like, I think to me, it sounds like some of your pain is also very multifaceted. Like, it's pain for you, and obviously you guys are being foster parents because you care about children. You're like, and as you said, like how's this affecting the kids, and like this is probably affecting other families, and like that's a very complex situation when it comes to forgiveness. So what are some other thoughts about forgiveness, about what does it look like for us to forgive people? What do we need for forgiveness? And why do we forgive? Why is forgiveness important? Tally, you got something?
Yeah, I guess for me, a lot of I always think about the person's motives for what they did that was wrong, and their capacity for understanding and their capacity for forgiveness. So I don't even really need somebody always to apologize to me if I think that they're not able. I have there's a lot of complexity wrapped up in it for me, except that I guess I often just, unless I have experience with somebody to the contrary, if it's somebody who I know and love and I know they love me, I don't assume they were trying to hurt me. And so it's easy to forgive, usually. So until something becomes a pattern, I don't usually have that hard of a time forgiving somebody. And then when there's things that are patterns, I think, well, why are they doing that same thing over and over? And then it becomes a question of, that's so much of a part of their personality or the capacity or mental illness or whatever that causes them to do something that's the same thing over and over. So either way, I think I can forgive them. That doesn't mean I'm going to behave with them the same way always, because I might want to protect myself, but forgiving them isn't that hard in that instance, in either one of those situations for me.
Yeah, it is a different one. It's a repeated behavior. And that just reminds me of like when I was teaching, and I love teaching the little kids. And like when we would do the musical, I was doing musicals with like 4th to 8th graders. And like, I loved it because like the first time that they did something wrong, like Tally, you'll appreciate the theater world, like talking backstage or talking when the director's talking, like the first time that's a problem, I didn't have to like lose my crap on them. It was like a teachable moment. I could assume like they're little, like the first time it's a teachable moment, but then once you've taught it, and then, it's the same thing. Like once you've acknowledged a behavior, but it's different if it keeps repeating.
Right. But then by the same token, don't you take into account the expectation for some sort of behavior that they may or may not have the capacity for? I think children is a great example in that point. Cause like, I know when I've done musicals with children, we have had to keep them in a completely separate area. And the only time they get anywhere near the wings is when they're about to walk on stage, because a first grader, for instance, which is younger than you're talking about, but it's a very clear example. A first grader cannot know, they're not going to know to continue to be quiet backstage until they're seasoned theater. Like there's obviously professional actors that are that age, but they're professional actors that are that age that start doing it at a very young age, and they're finally conditioned to it. But by nature, a 6-year-old child isn't going to have the capacity for it. But I know adults that don't have the capacity for certain things that I might expect, or that would make me feel better, or that would keep them from hurting me. Well, I just have to either take myself out of the situation to be harmed. You know what I mean? If I can acknowledge they don't have that capacity, then I need to also be a part of the solution.
Yeah, and I think like acknowledging that can like lead to more compassion. I mean, I see it, Abby's a first grader, and like behaviors I correct her on, and then like in her heart, she wants to do the right thing.
Right.
Like we try to keep her fingers out of her mouth, for example, germs, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I try to like correct her without shaming her, but then like it still just happens. And I see the look in her face of like that she wants to do the right thing, and she knows in her heart, but she just doesn't have the capacity to completely control herself.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's huge because you see, like you said, you see in her face in that moment, that she's sorry. She didn't want to do it, And
Yeah,
I
and I
think
think
that those factors for me, I take all those into account when I think about forgiveness.
yeah,
And
and I
I
think that
I
that's like
haven't come I'm sorry. Go ahead,
go
Sarah.
ahead.
I was just gonna
Well, I
say
think
I
like
haven't come across very many people who I deal with on a regular basis seek to hurt me or other people.
right. Yeah, because I think that's like that's like compassion. And we were like, I was helping Abby and like with her piano, and I can't remember what she was doing. And I was like, oh, you don't have to like um say something like every time you make a mistake, you don't have to get frustrated. Like mistakes are part of how we learn. And then she like did it again, and she like looked at me, and I was like, it's okay. Like I still love you when you do that. And I still love you when you put your fingers in your mouth. And I gave her other examples of things I know she's working on. And like she got like so emotional in that moment. And she said, the words she said was, you broke my heart. But what she meant was that like she felt so loved because like I just took that moment to tell her that even in the midst of these things we're trying to change, I love her exactly when she puts her fingers in her mouth. I love her when she, whatever it's doing, like it's okay. And we can still try to do better, but
Yeah. Yeah, I think often we don't when we talk about a first grader, it's easy for us to go, oh well, they can't help it, they don't have the capacity for anything different, and we can offer that forgiveness so much more readily. But I think we have to also remember how broken adults are, and
yes.
and if
Yeah.
we're going to continue to be in an environment with an adult that doesn't have the capacity for something different than what they're doing, then we have to learn to forgive them anyway. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think for like me in my situation of noticing like my bitterness and my like shutting down when this company like contacts me, and I think like what's good about it is that I'm not just giving into like the pressure, like the part of me that just says, oh, you should just forgive because this is a nonprofit organization, or, like you should, like, I think what I need to do is stay in this like weird bitterness, messiness, and like give myself permission to be here and like reflect on that and explore that. Because I think for me, my tendency is always to like say what I think other people want to hear or say what other people say I should say. And so I think that's my challenge in this situation, is just to continue to be honest, even though it's like going on and, I'm not changing that quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've thought about it a lot already. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add, Andrew?
I'm like, wait, I guess I have to now. I was like, do I need to say this? I don't know if it's just like repetitive or not. But I almost think of it sort of like the same way you would think of grief. Like it's just coming to terms with the fact that this thing is true and you don't want it to be true.
Yeah.
And like, how are you going to react to that? And of course, like, it gets complicated when you've got power differentials. Like, let's say you're on this nonprofit, it's like, if it was one person, it'd be different. And if it was your peers, it would be different. But since there's this power differential, it kind of complicates things. That was it. I guess it wasn't well developed, but got it out there.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty insightful. Like something I've been thinking through this, and something that's helped me forgive people who I know aren't going to change, is realizing like, what are my expectations? And now that Andrew said that, I think that's kind of made something click. Like I have to in some way grieve over how I expected a person to be or thought they would be, like especially their relationship with my parents. And in order to forgive them for their faults and have some sort of functioning relationship with them as they really are, like I have to both like I'm often repeatedly hurt because of inaccurate expectations, and I do think grief is part of the problem or part of the process of having a relationship with them. So
And I think it's sort of like setting boundaries in a relationship, like I guess that's forgiveness. That's kind of, you're getting into semantics there, but like, is forgiveness only when you're like, we can return to the full relationship we had before this event? Or is forgiveness also like, I'm gonna have to set this boundary in this relationship so that I can't be hurt like this again? Like, I would call it forgiveness, but I don't know if everyone would.
I think so. And I think that's a hard part, is that forgiveness is not easy to define. And yeah, and that it depends on the person, and it depends on whatever was the action. So yeah.
Yeah, it's like a nuanced thing, and every situation's different. And it just like goes to like another one of those things that it's not really helpful just to like say like you need to forgive. Like God wants you to forgive. Like that's, and then not like walk in the situation with somebody or help them like where they're at, and just like put that added pressure on them.
Something I think that's important about forgiveness, and I got this from Beth Moore, is that sometimes we forgive because it's what's best for us. And again, like that's how I've been with my parents. Like I need to forgive them in order to let go of a lot of my bitterness and hurt, in order for me to live a fuller life, and not sort of be held back by that.
And I was thinking about something you said earlier, Lee, like that forgiveness has to be said out loud. And I don't think I always do say it out loud. So I want to like discuss that a little bit more. Like if there's a situation, like this is like a family situation I'm thinking of, and like the person hasn't asked for forgiveness, but they've hurt you, like, do you have to like look them in the eye and say, I'm forgiving you? Or can like the forgiveness just be internal and like in how you're behaving?
Personally, I don't think you need to say it out loud. Like it's like, I think forgiveness is more about action. And like, you know, and depending on the person, like I know with my parents, I would like they you know, they are deeply hurt and flawed people, and I would probably not be like, I forgive you for X, Y, and Z, because part of why I struggle to forgive them for is that they don't think they've done anything wrong. So me telling
Right.
them I forgive them would probably just make things worse. So
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think like if I can get to the point where I feel like I've forgiven the person and our relationship maybe not is exactly the same, but there's not that hurt every time we're together, and like I'm not like subtly leaking out hurtful feelings towards them or manipulating things or like sticking it to them wherever I can, like in a passive manipulative way, then like I feel like if I can truly say that those things aren't happening, then it's okay. Then I have like gotten to the point of forgiveness. And it could be even more hurtful for me to like stop and look at the person and be like, look, you really hurt me and I forgive you for doing all this. It almost just so like pious to me to be like, I'm granting you forgiveness. I guess because I grew up Catholic in the confessional, I don't know, like I grant you forgiveness for doing something you haven't asked forgiveness for. I think it's different if the person actually said like, I'm sorry, then there's like a place for like a verbal, like I forgive you. But if they've never said they're sorry, I don't know. And I think the situations could be different too, because maybe part of your healing is that you have to point out what they did to you and they need that to be able to grow. So maybe it's also just different scenarios.
Okay. So I have to go to the airport soon to pick up my brother. So I have kind of one more question. So today is the first day of Sukkot, which I'm not going to talk too much about. I thought the forgiveness was, I don't know, it touched me deeper, and I thought it'd touch you all. And I might come back to Sukkot because I liked what I was going to say. But next week is also Simchat Torah, which is kind of celebrating the community's commitment to the learning and love of Torah. It's very festive. And so we probably aren't, and I don't think whoever's teaching next week's talking about it. But I want to try and tie that in to this. That's true. And yeah, Mitch isn't here, Sue's not here, so I can't even talk about her coat without her. Thanks, Wade. So is there any, like, how has the scripture shaped your version of, or how you understand forgiveness? Is there anything you turn to in scripture about forgiveness? And, or even off the top of your head, like, where can you see for different types of forgiveness within the scriptures?
The ones that come to mind to me immediately, and it might just be because we're reading in Acts, kind of play into something that David said, and that they feel very doormatty. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Or Stephen forgiving the people that are martyring him and stoning him to death. So this idea of forgiveness is being just a lot of forgiveness I see being given in the Bible almost seems to perpetuate victimhood, and some of that is just kind of what makes it to the text, Paul persecutes Christians and then is forgiven for that, apparently, and we don't see any kind of the backlash of, like, Paul suffering the consequences because he's forgiven. And so I guess I have a very human and not divine view, but I think that the scripture, that the word, makes me very aware of how limited my view of forgiveness is, because what I see in the scripture seems very beyond me in many situations. So.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go real soon, so please continue without me, or
Okay.
feel free to wrap up if you don't want to talk about this anymore. But I do have a prayer request for myself, just let my Nana and things go well with family. Okay, so thank you all very much. Thanks for your patience with me. I've really enjoyed this. And I think that to talk about examples of forgiveness in the text, we have to really do a lot of what's that called? Like, you mentally story things.
Storyboarding.
No, I
Remember?
think we have to kind of read it. No, I'll think of it and text someone. That's
All right.
fine. Okay, so I'll see you all. Thank
right.
you.
Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Did anybody have any other thoughts based on the text and forgiveness? David?
It was interesting that it seems like most of our discussion reflected the need for us to forgive others, but I wonder if there's also, a role for us to reflect on our need to be forgiven.
Do you have any more thoughts about that?
I was also thinking about when in the Bible, this from our quadrants thing, when in the Bible the first when was the first forgiveness event?
Yeah. Did God forgive Adam and Eve?
Did he forgive them the way that we do as humans, or did he
I don't know
forgive
the
them
answer
in a
to
way?
that. I just
What's
know
that?
I don't know the answer. I just know that's in the beginning of the Bible.
Yeah. I wonder if he did forgive them, did he forgive them in a way that only God can, or did he forgive them in a way that humans do? I remember them being punished by being cast out of the garden.
But I think that brings up kind of what we were talking before about, is forgiveness just words, and is repentance just words, and does forgiveness nullify the need, like nullify any consequences of the thing that's being forgiven? And so if you look and say, well, were Adam and Eve forgiven? Well, they certainly suffered consequences, but and the same with Cain. Cain was not subjected to a life for a life, but he suffered the consequences of killing his brother. So yeah, I think, David, if we do go back to, well, what is the first instance of forgiveness? It kind of brings up that idea of forgiveness not being separated from consequences. That forgiveness doesn't mean that you don't suffer consequences. Because I would say that, yes, Adam and Eve were forgiven because they were not abandoned by God, that God was still with them. But they did suffer consequences for the actions. So yeah.
That causes me to think about, like, what kind of role does the forgiver play versus the role that the individual needing forgiveness plays. And I don't know that it always necessarily reflect that, one's in charge and one's like the offender and one's the offendee, and what are the dynamics between those two, and does it always reflect, in the same manner of God being on one side and humanity being on the other? Is that necessarily the roadmap for human forgiveness, or is that singularly the roadmap for divine forgiveness of humanity?
David, I think that's interesting because I'm thinking of, like, I'm going to shut the door so you can't hear me from two sources. We're saying, oh, he must have forgiven them because he continued to have relationship with them, but not in the same way. And, things were drastically different after that. And I think of, when we have relationships with people and there's a need for forgiveness in some way, and we can offer that forgiveness, whether it's spoken or unspoken, but that doesn't mean that things are going to go back to the way they were. There's times where things are irreparable.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's always like the person needing forgiveness has to speak up first or vice versa, because, like, what if, like, you're driving along and you get cut off and you never see that person again, but they made you angry? Like,
Right.
Then the forgiveness is really just on you. You're never going to, like, interact with that person again. Or what if you had to
Right.
forgive somebody that's died? They're not here.
I feel like that sort of goes back to people's diminished capacity. Obviously, if they're dead, they don't have the capacity to.
Yeah.
What what if any role does forgiveness of ourselves play? And since we would be on the side of the forgiver and the forgiven, how does that change forgiveness in a way that's different? Because we have to, because the effort is to forgive ourselves of something.
I think in my scenario, like, I don't know if it's forgiveness or just acceptance but it feels like new territory for me personally, but like forgiving myself or accepting the fact that I'm not over the situation, even though there's like things that tell me that I should just be over it but like like forgiveness, like I said, or acceptance of exactly where I'm at. And, it goes back to my illustration with Abby, like and like Tali said, like it's easier with kids somehow. And sometimes I think like I try to imagine the little kid inside adults as well, because it's just so natural, like for me to like love kids and accept kids and have compassion and accept them exactly where they were. And if I could take that and apply it to myself, and when I reflect on myself, that like I am a work in progress and I make a lot of mistakes. So can I forgive myself and offer myself compassion, accept myself where I am, but also not like give up on the fact that I can still continue to improve or hopefully not repeat those things.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, Sarah, that idea of for other people being able to, see the child in them, because at everybody's core, I think there's a little bit of that. And then to see that for yourself too,
Well, I noticed like in my family growing up that we just tend to show a lot of affection to little kids, but there's like some breaking point age, not that it's an exact science, where it's like hugs are different, like maybe you don't hug as much or you don't interact, like, and I felt it growing up, and I see it in just like how my family and even my extended family cousins treats kids. But it's like when they start getting into that, like maybe pre-middle school, whatever, everybody doesn't really know how to interact with them. So people not give up entirely, but it's totally different. Like it just would be nice to like approach, and it's also probably not appropriate to like approach everybody like they're a little kid, but some of that just love and care and compassion, it just feels like a big gap from like little kid to like a little kid in a bigger body, and then suddenly you're expecting them to behave like an adult.
right.
And then like maybe like the corrections are harsher, or the compassion is less, or they're expected that they have more capacity than they have. I don't know, just in my personal family, there's like a gap of like how little kids are treated, and then kids in that awkward middle school, high school age.
Yeah.
I think as a nurse, I think there's an element of uncomfortableness as children move into their early physical changes that occur as they begin to enter adulthood, from a pubescent standpoint. I think that there's an uncomfortableness in society with how to manage that well. And I think that could be part of the factor in how do we show love in that time when young men and young women, or older children, are becoming young men and young women. I think there's an uncomfortableness with that process, and certainly in our society. I don't know if it existed in other societies or how they handled that historically, but I think certainly there's a challenge that I think we face in our modern societies here at this point, in how that looks and what's appropriate. Obviously, we know what things aren't, but I think it's also challenging to know what things are.
Sometimes kids that age also display strong preferences to know, to not have.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much with their mom or dad, or maybe with their mom or dad, but with other family members, where it wouldn't be appropriate if they didn't want you, you know, at that point, it's that consent piece. Like,
Mhm.
no, you don't have to hug your uncle,
Yeah.
right? I mean, yes, Charlie. I have to go check something for Charlie.
Lee texted me and she said head cannon was what she was thinking of. Is that a thing or is that a typo? Is that a
No,
thing?
that's the thing.
It's a thing.
Okay. Shows how much I know. And then she said, does Jesus forgive Peter or Thomas? Do they ask for it? And what about Judas?
I that's a very interesting question. It also draws to mind what I was thinking of just a few minutes ago was, did Abel forgive Cain?
Well, did Adam and Eve forgive Cain too?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point too, Wade. And does forgiveness transcend time and space? Or is forgiveness finite?
Hmm.
And are the dead really at diminished capacity?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we were joking about that, but that's a great question, Wade. I think you know, is there an element of opportunity in the time after our earthly existence is over in our current bodies? Is there the capacity for forgiveness in the next life?
Yeah,
I'm imagining that we don't lose all of our capacity for what we are prior to now, or prior to death. I would imagine that comes with us in many ways into our life, into our next life. It would seem weird if it was like Control Alt Delete, and the keyboard or the computer's wiped clean.
Well, does anybody have any last thoughts they wanted to share before we do prayer requests? The older I get, the more times I see things typed up and I wonder if it's a typo or I just don't get it. Like, did somebody get auto-corrected or is this a thing or is it a typo? And I just, happened to me yesterday too. And Craig said, didn't Jesus wash Judas's feet knowing what he was going to do? Or had Judas left?
He hadn't left yet.
Yeah, I remember. I apologize for not having the reference, but I remember that
I
Jesus
forgive you.
did tell him to go and do what he had to do. Basically, as I recall the gist of it.
Yeah.
I believe
Thank
his
you
words
for-
were "get her done."
Get her done. No, but
Might
Thank
have
you for
different
that.
translations.
contribution. And Sarah, thank you for that, gracious and rapid forgiveness you offered me.
All right, well, let's go on to prayer requests.